Hello and welcome to Stand in the Gap. I'm Sam Rohr, and I'm going to be joined again today by Pastor Isaac Crockett. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever been deceived by someone? Have you perhaps ever deceived someone else? Well, you know, we're all aware of lies and distortions. It's reported in the media, many politicians regularly. It's happening all the time. Last week, today you'll see it in the news, and you're going to see it in the days ahead. If there's one perhaps most concerning problem that I have, I believe in America today and worldwide, I would say it is deception. Deception about God, about the purpose of government, or science and natural law, how we define it, or COVID and corrected policies, climate change, and more. Go on and on. When Jesus told his disciples that in the days prior to his return, that the leading sign would be mass deception, we really must be alert and train ourselves to recognize deception and inoculate ourselves against it, lest we lose our civil and spiritual freedom. Now, by definition, deception involves causing someone to believe something which is not true, typically in order to gain some personal advantage. Webster's Dictionary of 1828 says this: deception is the misapplication of the established signs used to communicate thoughts. Now, biblically, we know that the devil is referred to as the father of lies. He's a liar from the beginning. He deceived Eve in the Garden of Eden by subtly questioning God's authority. Sometimes lies are clearly untrue statements, such as climate change will kill humanity, when God has clearly indicated that He will bring final judgment, not man. Sometimes deception occurs only when part of the truth is shared, which then leads the hearer to a wrong conclusion. But why is deception so dangerous? What ingredients are required for deception to succeed? And how can we attempt to detect that which is deceptive? And then, how can we inoculate ourselves against deception? Between today's program and next week in Part 2, we'll focus on this theme, Deciphering Deception. Our special guest is Dr. Marlene McMillan, author of Mountains of Deceit, How the Dialectic Process Has Infected the Culture, that and many other books. And with that, I want to welcome into the program right now Dr. Marlene McMillan. Marlene, thanks for being with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It is a joy and a delight.
It's great to have you back again, and we've got a lot to talk about in this program. This is in your area of expertise. You focus on it, you've written books on it. I want to start right out here real quickly and just ask this fundamental question. Dr. Marlene McMillan, why is deception so dangerous to a person, to a family, to an entire nation?
Well, in many ways, this is a topic of either life or death. It matters because liberty is built on fixed principles, and those fixed principles have to be on a basis of truth. So as soon as you have an individual believing a lie, they're going to have a result that may not work out very well. In fact, we often say that whenever you've got a problem, there's a lie operating somewhere. And if you can identify the lie, the problem will be solved. So as a nation, the more problems we have, that's more evidence that we're basing our actions and our thought premises on lies. And when the lies are cleared up, the problems will go away.
So, Dr. McMillan, as we look for these problems, we see a lot of problems in our nation and the different levels of things. But as we look at these problems, we look at these lies, how do we understand what is going into it that makes it deception? What's the recipe? You know, there's recipe cards to make a cake, and you take these different ingredients that by themselves are not that big of a deal, but you put them together and you can make a really nice cake. What are the components and the patterns that we should be aware of that we say that's part of an overall, a bigger recipe for a problem, for destruction, for deception?
Okay, the very first thing is the definition. Definitions are actually the building blocks of thought. So you can define a word biblically, You can define a word secularly, meaning leaving God out. You can define a word using what we call a postmodern definition, which postmodernism would be moving past the Bible, past the Constitution, as if you could really do that. And so what you have going on is that you, first of all, the definitions is the biggest foundational part of this. But then you also have to want to be deceived. You know, if you're a truth lover and you seek truth, then that's important to you and you will gravitate toward truth. If you like the lie, then you'll gravitate toward the deceit.
Dr. Marlene McMillan, we have so much more to talk about, a lot of questions for you, a lot of discussion coming up, and we always enjoy having you on our program. We're talking today with Dr. Marlene McMillan about deciphering deception. There's a lot of deception going on in America, even in our homes and in our churches, believe it or not, but of course also in our politics and everywhere else. We're going to go away to a brief timeout. We'll be right back to discuss more of this just after this.
Truth, flexible or permanent? The Bible, ancient history, or powerfully relevant? Culture, a reflection of enlightenment or warning signs? The pastor, commentator, or frontline combatant? Every day, American Pastors Network speaks to these questions where and when they matter. With hundreds of affiliate radio stations nationwide, a website and mobile app screening today's headlines through the twin lenses of the Bible and the Constitution, educating, informing, equipping. This is the American Pastors Network. The time is now to stand in the gap for truth.
Marlene, we're going to continue right now. We've entitled this program Deciphering Deception. And I read from Webster's 1828 definition in the last segment, talking about it's the misapplication, deception, the misapplication of signs, communication signs. And then I thought, you know what, deciphering really fits in with that well. I'm going to share that. The definition of that is this. Deciphering means to succeed in understanding, interpreting, or identifying something, to convert a written code text or a coded signal into understandable language. Now that's just the opposite of deception. So we want to decode deception in this program. So let's go here next if I could. First, what would you say is the ultimate target of deception? Deception, the content, the communicating words that are misapplied, but there's deceivers that also communicate deception. So what is the goal? What's the goal of the deceiver and deceptive words?
Okay. Well, first of all, the targets are children. The target is always the next generation, because whoever controls the hearts and minds of the children gains power over the long haul. The goal really is of the deceiver is tyranny. They like ruling. It is a misapplication of our idea of how we're to occupy, not just occupy space, but actually the dominion mandate of learning how to rule and reign with Christ, how to provide individual self-government, and then that moving out into a culture to bring liberty and peace and joy and blessing to a nation. So all of this is tied together, and the tyrant wants to get people to follow him in a way that the people don't even realize. In other words, deceit. If you know you're deceived, you all of a sudden you're not deceived. So the idea is like using a term like better. When a politician comes along and says, I'm going to make the world a better place. Well, I encourage everyone, if you hear that, you get a definition of better. You get him to tell you what he means by better, because his idea of better and your idea of better might be two very different things.
As we look at these definitions and you know, finding out what people really mean in context, it's almost like a doctor looking at somebody, a patient who's sick. And what are some signs we can see? You know, we think of like a malignant tumor, and these deceptions are kind of like that, but maybe almost more like a bad virus, because they can infect somebody and then almost go from them to somebody else. What are some of the warning signs of infection, of deception, if we could?
Okay, so the subheading on my book, Mountains of Deceit, is how the dialectic process has infected our culture. Mm-hmm. And what happens is it's very subtle. It's a little bit at a time. It's gradually. And what happens is words get redefined. So 60 or 70 years ago, when the term alternative lifestyle was accepted, people didn't realize that they were eventually going to see transgenderism and see all these changes in the culture becoming normalized. See, that's another thing too, is what is normal? What do you accept as just normal? Because you never question what is normal. So be careful what you laugh at. Be careful what becomes the normal habits in your daily life, because very quickly we can decline into a new normal that's not going to lead to where we want it to go.
So Sam referenced earlier Jesus' warnings when he was on the Mount of Olives, the Olivet Discourse that talks about things to come, where Jesus says, don't be deceived. And he says, you know, there's going to be hypocrisy, there's going to be betrayal, there's going to be hatred. But he said there's going to be false teachers deceiving many. Those are Jesus' words. Paul tells the same thing as he's saying his last goodbye, so to speak, to Timothy. One of his charges to him is don't be deceived. And there's coming a time where people are going to be deceived even by false teachers. But Jeremiah, the Old Testament prophet, he warns us in chapter 17 of Jeremiah that our own heart deceives us. Our own heart is desperately wicked and deceitful. So I might be watching right now, and you know, there have been a number of cases in the last 3 or 4 years that I've noticed where newscasters who are in front of the cameras day in and day out had malignant tumors or other health issues going on, and they themselves were unaware of it. But other people could look at them, viewers, doctors were watching, and they said, you know what, you're sick. You might not think you're sick, but you need to get checked out. You're actually sick. How do we do a self-test? Because Jeremiah warns us, we need to check our hearts. We need a self-test of our deceptive hearts. What kind of process could we go through, signs to identify in our own hearts the deception, this infiltration, this infection that's going on? Okay, so coming back to the Word, knowing what the Word says, not our own hearts, because just like you said, the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Well, right there, you have analyzed the difference between a New World Order way of thinking, a postmodern way of thinking, of seeing man as basically good, who can be perfected even more or made better through education, versus someone who's in need of a savior. These are different worldviews. So part of how you stop deceit is by getting clarity in your own mind as to what does the Word say about God, man, and government. And we put out little charts about these things. We teach these things in our webinar, because when you latch on to how simple the choice between life and death is, between the idea that Jesus came that you might have life and have it abundantly, but Satan came to steal, kill, and destroy. So ideas that steal, kill, and destroy. When somebody comes in and they want to take away everything, they want to destroy everything, they cancel everything that has been positive. You can just look at someone and see, are they a builder or are they a destroyer? Are they a consumer or are they a producer? And these differences in how you do things are evidence of your worldview. So every time you speak, you can tell somebody's worldview. And so learning the difference between truth and error in the way it applies to culture is really exciting.
And Marlene, that is excellent. So one of the ways a person can do a self-test, as Isaac suggested or requested. You went to, kind of said, back up and take stock of what kind of a worldview you have. Now, we've got a problem in this society in which we live because, according to George Barna, Numbers, and others, that there may only be 3% of millennials in Generation Z, as an example, who hold to a biblical worldview, who would understand what the Bible says about the role of God and the role of government and the nature of man. Now, this is a tough question. We didn't go over this ahead of time. I'm going to ask you right now. Is it even reasonable to suspect that a person who does not have a biblical worldview, with a right view of God, a right view of man, a right view of government, as God has created, can they even identify deception? Or are they the ones most inclined to be deceived, perhaps?
Okay. So truth operates in an is and not language. So that language says it's true or it's not. It's a lie or it's the truth, okay? It's right or it's wrong. Well, we now have a couple of generations of people who've grown up in a very relativistic world where they're told constantly that there's no fixed premises. There's no foundation that things that are always right and always wrong. There's your truth and my truth, and we can all hold to whatever we want to believe. So that builds, even when you have in a church, you may have people that go to church every Sunday. You may have people who stand in a pulpit and have a ministerial degree. But if they have this relativistic worldview, if they speak in this whatever language, if they do not believe that there's immutable laws of the universe that apply to everyone, this is where you get into things like liberation theology that teaches that there's some systems that work for one group of people and a different system that works for another. Well, all of this then makes it harder to know where those lines are. It's very insecure. You can't build a culture on it, and it will result in tyranny, not liberty.
All right, and I would like to go further, but I'm going to take what you're saying, and saying a biblical worldview anchored on truth is an essential foundation, I'm paraphrasing, for a nation to be free and blessed of God. You move from that anchor point of truth as identified by God. Now you're into the field of tyranny and deception. Now I'm rephrasing a little bit. Now let's take. I want you to, if you could, illustrate. There are many, many areas across our country right now where deception is really playing havoc with our culture. You've touched on a couple. I'm not going to put anything in your mouth. I'm going to let you go first. But take a leading deception, as you would identify it, that is dramatically altering the direction of this country, affecting our freedom, all that, and identify it and explain a little bit how it is working, how it's being able to succeed.
Okay, so what we have going on is, in essence, we're living in a massive re-education camp. Now, I know that may sound really dramatic to some of our listeners, but when you're constantly bombarded with the same message from every direction, we once upon a time had the media reinforcing biblical morals. Now we have a constant diet of hearing from the media, and everywhere you go, the reasons that immorality should be justified. So let that play out over time. People's defenses go down. We just get conditioned, even in our what we can tolerate in movies and in everywhere we turn. So we don't pay as much attention to the language. Now, most of you at least have heard, even if you're too young to have actually been there the day it happened, when Bill Clinton was during his impeachment and the trials and all the things that went with that. And he basically, the famous line, well, it all depends on what is. But in many ways, that actually is a summary of all of the world, because whoever defines your future. So you'd better be careful who in your life defines is, and that the I am defines what is. Okay, I have a lot more that I could do with that.
Well, I know you could, but you took us right there to that point. You're talking about the biggest deception affecting our culture would be redefinition of language that is altering the way we think about everything, and as a result, bit by bit, piece by piece, not us pushing back against that, we have actually welcomed it in, and we now see a tremendous impact on our culture. Ladies and gentlemen, hope you're being aware of what's being said and catching this. This is very, very helpful. Hopefully it is to us. Hopefully it is to you. We'll be back in just a moment with a conclusion today with our special guest, Dr. Marlene McMillan.
Stand in the Gap is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV, positively different television.
Welcome back to Stand in the Gap, and Sam and I today are talking with our friend Dr. Marlene McMillan, and we are talking about Deciphering Deception. This is the first part of a two-part series in Deciphering Deception. And Dr. McMillan, as we bring this to a close, the Bible warns us repeatedly about deception. We see it from the very beginning in Genesis all the way to Revelation. Jesus warns consistently and constantly about deception. We see that the devil, Satan, is the father of lies and deception. We see that there are false teachers that will deceive, gullible people. But in our day and age today, right now, in this time and day, what are some of the sources of deception? What are some of the voices that are doing this, teaching these falsehoods and spreading this? Maybe even some of the positions that are being infiltrated to get this out to our young people, our next generation, as well as to their parents and to their grandparents as well.
Well, let's talk about the normalization of deception. And a lot of how this is being done is through the curriculum, not the content, but the methodology in our education. So this putting people in circles all the time. You're seeing it even with adults having to go to all the sensitivity training and all of those things. Those are all to get you to buy into the approval of the group becoming more important than standing alone. In fact, it's considered a negative now if you think differently from the group, as if the majority makes it right, as if the majority determines truth. So you have it coming from all directions. So you have the re-education at work. You have the children spending their whole day saying their opinion and expressing their opinion on things that they have. I mean, a second grader doesn't know enough to know what their opinion is on many things. And yet they're being put in circles. It's called the circle process, or it's another word for restorative justice. It goes all the way from there till we just had the Secretary of Homeland Security, Mayorkas, using the term that we're acting in our immigration policies, that we're acting restoratively. Does that sound beautiful or what? But when you find out the definition of restorative justice, it has a definition, and it means a subjective way of looking at the law. It's whatever I feel like the law ought to be today, not what the law is. And so this subjectivity is just tragic. And so I want you to really tune in to how it's coming from all directions.
And Marlene, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. Actually, join us next week, because this is only part one of this program, Deciphering Deception. We've talked about some basic elements. Next week, we're going to talk about and ultimately conclude with Can you be inoculated? How do you inoculate yourself to this deception which is coming upon all of us? We need to be. We'll offer a solution. Well, thanks for watching us today. On behalf of Isaac and myself and the entire Stand in the Gap team and American Pastors Network, we appreciate you. Let us know this week by writing to us that you are being blessed by this program. Partner with us in prayer. Partner with us with your finances so that we can reach more people for the cause of truth.